This is Kevin Pruitt, host of the podcast Clear Waters, with my co-host Nick Petros. Nick, thanks for joining us today on Clear Waters.
Good to be here. Excited to have Peter back. Exciting story to tell today.
We do have our great friend from down under, Peter Selby. Peter, we appreciate you taking time in your busy day to really just to talk about clarity in an otherwise murky world. So our normal format, we've talked about it before. Normal format is just start with a great story to kind of lay the foundation and then move from there. And Pete or Nick, not Pete, Nick, you got a story for us today.
Yeah, I've got a story. We usually leave the smart stuff to Peter, so I'll kick it off. I think we're just coming out of the holiday season. We're going into a little mini holiday season, and shopping might be on folks' minds. So I wanted to start with a shopping story that's pretty familiar to a lot of folks, which brings up our core theme today, which is buying something when you're not entirely clear on what's coming to you. We're probably 3 months away, or 3 months after most folks upgrading their iPhone. I'm one of those. I'm an absolute sucker for the iPhone keynotes. And I often spend way too much money buying the exact same thing over and over again. This case was no different. But this story really made me think, and I think it marries to our theme. So I was in Florida with my parents. New phone was out. I was staring at my old phone, and suddenly the need kicked in. I had to make a purchase. Of course, this was an hour before a reserved dinner with family, which is prime fashion. I had to make the purchase. So immediately hopped in the family car and started touring South Florida for a T-Mobile that had this particular phone in stock. No planning whatsoever, but hey, you got to do it. You got to do it. Finally found one that did, got the rep together. They do a great job in the store, or so I thought. You trade in your phone, they automatically map everything over to the new phone. It takes like 10 minutes. Then they say you're all set, you sign, you pay, you leave. I get in the car after swapping everything over and find out that my phone's not online. So I just spent all this money and transferred everything, and I have no access to anything, and I have no signal. So I'm using everyone's phone around me to try to call support, go through support twice. They said they'll send a ping, didn't work the first time, go back, same thing. Finally get the phone activated and realize that I'm 10 minutes late for dinner. So get to dinner, enjoy dinner. Some events happen there. But after the fact, it's like, okay, am I back online? Am I connected to the world again through this device? Which I was, thankfully, but immediately realized that this phone I'd just gone through all that trouble for and jeopardized a family dinner for, ran the exact same operating system as the previous phone. It was just as fast. It was a little heavier than my previous phone. I had to spend more money on a new case. Didn't come with a charger, so I had to buy a different charging unit for it. It came with all this overhead that I didn't expect, in addition to almost ruining my entire evening. So I'd say, in addition to me poorly planning this particular acquisition, it just really highlighted that sometimes you don't see everything under the hood. You just see the shiny object at the top. And that need is driven by something other than a full understanding of what you're consuming. So I thought that was relevant to our theme today. Peter, what do you think?
Oh, look, absolutely. In actual fact, you broke just about every procurement rule in the book there. And why companies have procurement controls, it's all around that. It's the buying emotion, and you're buying under pressure. You haven't investigated the product. You're struggling to find supply.
Yeah.
So price comes out of the decision, and linked overhead comes out of the decision. That's why so many software projects go wrong. But I mean, it's a classic example. And if you take that to its ultimate level, if you think about buying a business, for instance, the whole idea of not being able to understand fully what you're buying there is the highest risk of all. And some of these transactions obviously are multi-millions. But if you think of the standard process of buying a business, there is a financial view, I guess, and a bit of a sales view, and an investor pack that goes to companies. But all the stuff that's going on underneath, like the operating system that you've just talked about with your phone, is a bit of guesswork. You can't clearly see it, and it's not until you've acquired the business and realized that there's quite a lot of broken things under the hood, not forgetting that the financial view you see of the business, of course, has been manipulated to get to that point for the last 2 or 3 years, because whoever it is trying to sell their business. So it's interesting, that whole concept of not understanding the operating system underneath is business everywhere, but certainly in the equity space of acquiring businesses, is probably one of the biggest known but undealt with issues left standing in that whole private equity world.
Yeah, I think
Oh, yeah.
part of the problem, or part of the reason why it's often overlooked or unknown, I think it's an access problem, right? Like, people know that it's there, but they basically don't really have a vehicle to go in and explore, practically explore. But that's something, you and business drivers have really refined over the last decade, right? Like getting under the hood, understanding what's happening, identifying risk.
Yeah,
How
I
did
mean,
that come together?
yeah, for exactly the same reason. So we do a huge amount of due diligence at the front end of any of our processes before we pull any change levers, because we found from over the years of either when in earlier times for us, or when we go into businesses now where they've tried to drive change, we often find that with all the best intentions, people have tried to make some improvement in one area or another, not fully understanding the interrelationships across the enterprise. And so you can, whilst driving some good in the very area you're focused on, you can be making things a lot worse somewhere else, and the overall situation is worse than when you started. So we developed a due diligence process that looks at multiple angles, if you like, from the governance all the way through to what the customer sees from the service or the product, and really understand all those interrelationships before we start pulling any change levers.
One thing
And
you
that,
were talking about earlier, Peter, was the idea of someone preparing to sell their business, and they may be moving things around to make it look more attractive than it actually is. So how do you overcome that? What's in place that kind of would be able to see through, give you clarity into those I hate to use the word manipulations, but in essence but actually what it is.
Well, currently, right now, very little in the acquisition process. What they need access to be able to do, and the point Nick made, is you need to be able to lift the operational hood, if you like, and look at the
Exactly.
governance, look at the controls around supply and demand, look at the controls around customer delivery, look at the controls around cost and all the things that go with it. Look at, for instance, the confirmed sales versus how much turnover there normally is, what's really going on inside that business. And the problem that you get in the acquisition space is people take a financial view, of course, and get a financial investor view. They don't know what questions to ask to uncover the stuff that's going on operationally. Right. So yeah, no, it is a real gap in that process.
So is that where the data comes from? It's question and answer. Like, what's the source of the information?
I guess there's two base sources for that information. One is question and answer. If you know what questions to ask, you can uncover what's going on pretty quickly. And secondly, of course, any business has got data in its platforms and systems, and it's the combination of those two things that gives you a clearer picture.
Mm-hmm. So it's what's shown to you and what's uncovered through the investigation process?
Yeah, I mean, when we do due diligence before optimizing a business, for instance, we will look at the data and what that's telling us right now. We'll look at high level what the governance is by talking to a couple of the C-suite people that are involved in the high level governance, or the board, depending on depending on the organization. Then we'll go in and look for and ask questions more deeply, and look for evidence of some of the things that are going on, and that the formulation of all of that gives you a really clear picture. You just got to know what to ask, and I mean, you can do it all fairly quickly. It's just you've got to know what to ask and what the answers tell you. The other side of it is the experience, I guess. When we first started doing due diligence on businesses, we weren't asking all the right questions. That takes time to develop, and equally, we weren't making the right I guess, the right conclusions from the questions we are asking. So some of that because they were the wrong questions. So developing a process to do that takes a while, and it's taken us a while to develop something that works. And it's now industry agnostic. We can do it on any business, but yeah, you can't get there overnight.
That's fascinating. It's been fun to learn from you. But seeing it all come together, I think that's, at least in my experience, been the main value, like having access to information other people can't get, even if it's just something that can be synthesized from two different perspectives. Something pretty high value.
Yeah, and look, it's probably one of the attractions that gives us commercial flexibility when we're working with organizations to improve their outcomes, is we can afford to get remunerated on outcomes because we've done the due diligence up front. We know we'll be able to deliver. If you didn't do that due diligence, that would be a very high risk strategy, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's interesting that if you think about the business improvement world, that whole idea of uncovering what's going on more deeply has been there for years. Having good systems to do it is a different thing, but the idea of it's been there for a long time. Things like lean, and that started in the 70s, but it's never made its way to the world of business acquisition and equity. And yeah, it's just one of the things that's never evolved in that space.
I studied economics at university, and the one thing I distinctly remember is this Latin phrase, that caveat emptor, which means "let the buyer beware." You know, and that has stuck with me. And I mean, it sounds like to me that based on, you know, there are really two factors at play here. It's not just the fact that you know how to get to the data. You also have to be able to know how to apply, just by sheer experience, apply the data that you see. So it really is a two-stage or a two-pronged, I guess, approach. And it's like a stool. You know, you can't just have one of those legs. You need to have the information, but you also need to be able to know what the information is telling you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So the interpretation of the data is as big an art as the data itself. And you know, some of the stuff where Nick's company and business drivers have been working together, Dash and business drivers, is exactly that. If you can't make the interpretation reasonably user-friendly, people interpret the wrong messages from the data. And we've got examples all over the world of you know, when companies like SAP came to the rescue with enterprise systems and started linking all the different business elements together. There's this warehouse full of data, and you can drill down into it and do all you like, but of course the interpretation becomes quite tricky because there's so much data, and people make as many mistakes as they do without the data. So making it simple and visually interpreting the data is critical. Now, if you take that back to the conversation we just about procuring things, again, in the world of supply chain, for instance, the procurement controls you put in really only become super effective when they become easy for the user. If there's a whole list of things to sift through to find out what you should be paying or what relationship there is with a supplier, people don't use it because it's too hard. You've got to make it visual. Well, the same thing would be in the acquisition space. You know, there needs to be something beyond this current situation you've got with PowerPoint slides and static data. There's got to be some more agile way of reporting and determining what's going on, coupled with asking different set of questions. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nick, as we're wrapping up today, what's something that has really stuck out in your mind today that, you know, kind of a takeaway? And then I want to circle back with Peter on the same question, just really around like the acquisition space.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's more information out there than you may be aware of, or maybe readily accessible today, that could help you make a good buying decision, whether it's your next iPhone or the next company you acquire. That's the big takeaway.
And Peter, how many people are doing enough due diligence when they're acquiring companies?
That's a really big question. I mean, I
I mean,
guess
in your experience.
they're doing as much due diligence as the current process allows.
I love the way you phrase that.
But there are definitely some operational blind spots and all of that. And the old phrase "buyer beware," I agree. But the whole point of due diligence is to try and reduce that buyer beware risk. You could almost have a buyer beware gauge, couldn't you? But,
Exactly. Exactly. We're just going to call it the Peter gauge from now on. So. Because he is our business acquisition specialist for sure. But yeah, I mean, I just love these conversations, and Nick, it is, I mean, it really is interesting to see the guests that we have on Clearwaters, and just really to see how they can speak into their particular areas of expertise and really deliver on what we want to deliver through this podcast. And I mean, there's so much more we can cover. And Peter, we're going to certainly have you on again, because we've just started the conversation. We haven't ended it, but thank you for just joining us today. And Nick, thanks for bringing the color commentary, as you always do, and so to speak, but really just bringing clarity in an otherwise murky world. Guys, thanks again.
Pleasure to be here. No worries.